Welcome to the PCS Edventures Educator Spotlight Series. In today's sponsored feature story, we're exploring how students in Chemung Township, New Jersey are discovering how history, culture, and engineering connect, one brick at a time. We caught up with Lisa Abramovitz, who's leading her students through the Brick Lab Famous Architecture program.
Hi, my name is Lisa Abramovitz. I teach in Chemung Township School District in Chemung, New Jersey, which is in Burlington County, and I am the gifted and talented teacher for kindergarten through fourth grade.
Before you started this program from PCS Edventures, and we're talking about the Brick Lab Famous Architecture, which is a really fun one for the kiddos, what was the biggest challenge that you had in the classroom with planning any hands-on activities?
So my entire program is very hands-on, but what I find is that I find different things on the internet and I get ideas from colleagues, but the problem is that you're always running, I need the baking soda from here, and I need the hammers from here, and I need the pencils from here, and the glue from here. And what I liked about your program, it was really an all-in-one package. It made it really easy for me to put everything together, and it came with a really strong curriculum. So that made it really easy for me. So I knew I wanted to do something with building, and I try to tap into the different intelligences like verbal intelligence, building, and auditory. So I really wanted to do something where the kids had to follow directions independently. When I say independently, they did work in small groups, but I did want to do something where the kids can work with a partner or a small group to actually end up with a finished product. And I wanted it to, in addition to them building something, I wanted it to have another dimension to it. And what I really liked about this project is that they were learning about the history of architecture. They were learning about famous structures around the world. And so we were able to take a relatively basic idea and really expand on it. And so the kids I really feel like they got so much out of it.
Take me back to the very first moment that you opened up the box with everything in it. What was your reaction when you saw everything, all the materials and the lesson plans? And then how much prep did it take you to kind of get everything up and running for that very first lesson and activity?
So, I'll be honest, it was very overwhelming when I saw this gigantic box arrive at my door, and I was very excited. But when I opened it up, I was immediately just in awe over the curriculum guides and the build guides. I thought they were visually very appealing. The pictures were beautiful. They went step by step. Now, I am working with gifted students, but I think the program was slated for 4th through 6th grade, and I actually did it with 2nd through 4th grade. So it was a lot more challenging for particularly my 2nd graders, but they did it, and I was really proud of them. So when I opened it up, it really was ready to go. The only thing that I did is I purchased little food containers that I labeled like 2x2, 2x4, 2x6, and I separated all the bricks prior to doing the project. The reason I did that is because I was reading in your teacher's suggested guide that each build typically takes, I think, about 45 minutes. I only have 30 minutes per period from the time I pick them up to the time I drop them off. So it can be 20 to 25 minutes. And I thought to myself, how can I really expedite this and get the most out of it? And I realized that just having the kids try to pick the bricks out of the bags and trying to find the right size, it'll be so much easier if they're already separated. So that, I think, was probably one of the best ideas. One of the best modifications to the program is to have all the bricks already separated. And honestly, I even had some days where kids finished their work early, like in the weeks prior to doing this. I said, hey, do you want to come back to the table and help me separate these? And they love that. So even the kids were helping to separate it. At the end of each build, when they deconstructed, they would actually put them back in the, in the 2x10, in the 2x6, and it made it easier in that way.
That would be a big time saver. Yeah, that's excellent. And so when your students used everything for the first time, can you describe the vibe in the room, the excitement? What were some of the things that they were saying? And then go into maybe some of those aha moments, those really cool, like, oh, wow, this is, what were they most excited about?
Right. They were so excited. I think mainly because most of these kids have played with bricks at home. They were kind of brought up on bricks, playing with them since preschool. So when you see something like this in a classroom, it's really exciting because it almost feels like playtime, like it's not your typical book. It's just an exciting way to learn. And I would sometimes give them a few minutes of free build time before we started because they're so interested in the materials themselves. And even like the brick removers, I actually had them bring in some extra brick removers so that every table had one, so they could take the pieces apart. And they weren't quite sure how to use those, but we learned how to use those. And then when we started with the curriculum, they were so excited the first day. And what I noticed is that they really improved. At the very first build, it took us probably 2 or 3 class periods to make the very first build. And then as we progressed with time, they were finishing them with 10 minutes to spare. So they got much better at, it's really like a visual spatial skill to be able to look at the picture and determine how am I gonna recreate this building? And they really did a nice job with it.
In addition to the build and following the instructions, what were some of the other things that they learned from this program?
So I love just teaching them and having them learn about the history of building and the history of architecture. So for example, the very, very first, they started out with a boot camp. And within the boot camp, the kids learned to build a wall and a buttress. And they learned the difference between a buttress and a flying buttress. And it was just interesting to learn that in medieval times, that I didn't even know some of the very basic concepts of why a wall was originally built. So the walls obviously, kept out intruders, but they were also used to keep out floodwaters, to keep in livestock. So we kind of went over these basic skills every day. So the kids learned that, they needed the buttress to build a door. They needed the flying buttress to make it look more decorative. And medieval castles really brought that to fruition. So it was interesting to see the kids' perspective on architecture and understanding these very basic structures.
You sent a really fun video that I'm hoping we can use a few clips from these kids showing off their builds and then mentioning a little fun fact about what they learned. Tell me about that project. And I assume that's something that you completely did on your own. That's just something that you do with your classroom. You send out these newsletters and little mini video clips to all the parents, showing them what the kids did in class. Talk to me about the excitement around that, the green screen and all the fun things.
Right. So the way this project was designed, it was actually a grant project that I had written. We have a foundation in my community, and they will purchase they will fund unique learning opportunities. So I had the idea of writing a grant for this. So that's how it started. And part of the grant process is writing something creative and innovative and unique. So I figured, we're going to do this. So what we did is first we spent about maybe 3 weeks doing the architecture boot camp, and then every student did every build. Once we finished that, then the kids had to work with a partner and rank which one would they most like to research. So for example, like the Eiffel Tower or the Empire State Building or Chichen Itza in Yucatan. So the kids got to rank their first 3 choices. And then I went through all of their sheets and I gave everybody everybody was able to get their first or second choice. So I had a research sheet and we have Chromebooks, and the kids had to respond to a bunch of questions first on paper using the internet. So they had to determine when was their structure built, who was the architect. Now, sometimes it was so far back that the architect ended up being like the Mayans or the Aztecs. Like we couldn't necessarily identify, as opposed to some of the other structures where they can identify a specific architect. So once they did that, they had to talk about the purpose of why their structure was built and what was unique about the way their structure was built. So they did all of this, and then they had to find pictures online that they wanted to use as their green screen background. So the purpose was to make it look like they're standing in front of the place that they built. So we had kids that were in Laos and kids that were in France and kids that were in Mexico standing in front of their structures and holding their finished product. So that was a lot of fun. They had to memorize the facts and speak. They used note cards at first, but I said no note cards when we're actually filming. So they wrote down like bullet points, their main facts. They did a great job with it. But the last build is actually a castle. So the kids all got to design their own castle, and they absolutely love that as well. Some of these castles were the most gigantic things. The groups ended up working together because they were running out of bricks. And I said, well, if you work together, you can just put your castles together. So they had these really elaborate castles. So that was exciting. And a lot of times we would send those to the parents because they were just so excited for the parents to see what they built.
Any other creative ways to adapt the program? I know you just created a time saver by using the little containers and separating out the bricks, which helped because you were under a time crunch with that 30 minutes, which I totally get. That's fast, like comes and goes with kids in and out. Any other things that you did to adapt the program?
So one of the things that I did is PCS Edventures has a wonderful digital product where it has all the directions. I actually took that and I made my own Google Slides presentation based on that. But in addition to that, I used a lot of more information about each place that they were building. I wanted to give them even more background knowledge about the Eiffel Tower or the Panjim Pagoda or whatever it was that they were building, Notre Dame. And so I created that. And I gave them pictures and videos of the real life place before they actually did the build, so that it wasn't just a picture that they were looking at. Like they would take a virtual tour of the Empire State Building, or we did a virtual tour of Chichen Itza, so the kids could actually see what they were building before they built it. And it was fun. I actually had some kids that had actually traveled to some of these places. Like one of my students over spring break had been to Chichen Itza, and the boys in the class had been to the Eiffel Tower last year. So they really wanted to take on those projects as their own. So that was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And that's what I was going to ask you last is what lifelong skills they'll take from this STEM program, but it really crosses over into just having an appreciation for architecture and world travel. Can you speak to that?
I believe that to begin with, I think understanding the history of the architecture and why you need these very basic things, like we said, like a wall and a buttress, I think that that's a skill that will definitely expand and travel with them. Learning about these places around the world is just fascinating. And the kids, I think just when they teach others about their place, they become an expert on that one place. And I think that was another great aspect, is that they actually had to not only build it, but research it and then present it.
Excellent. And is this a program you would be able to use next year and the year after?
I'm usually on somewhat of a 3-year cycle because I have the same students every year, and I have the real primary kids that I usually do a different curriculum with. But my 2nd through 4th graders, depending on what it is, I try to sometimes use similar curriculums and just make modifications for the age. One of the things I was really, really excited about was seeing on the PCS Edventures website that they have a lot of other brick lab curriculums that were not necessarily the architecture program, but there was one in particular that looked really interesting to me about fairy tales. And the kids read fairy tales and they actually build the characters and can retell the story using the build. So I am hoping to write that grant for next year to the same group of kids now that I have, and I won't have to purchase the bricks again. I'll just have to purchase the curriculum, which is great. Because they just sell the curriculum without the bricks. Now that I have the bricks, I know you have multiple different curriculums, which I definitely plan to use in the future. So I was super excited about that.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. I love that to double dip. Anything else that I haven't asked that you would like to add or share about your experience with using the Brick Lab Famous Architecture?
In the past, I had always wanted to do something with bricks. And when I saw the program, it just seemed like a great fit for my students and for our curriculum, and it could not have been better. It was it was a great way to end the year. It kind of got started a little later in the year than I wanted to do, just some different curricular things. So I got nervous that we weren't going to finish on time, but we did. And I'm so excited to add something like this to the curriculum for next year, because it was really, really exciting.
Thank you, Lisa. It's inspiring to hear how much fun those kids had and how much they learned while exploring the world's most iconic structures. To listen to more stories from educators like you, visit edventures.com/spotlight. That's EDVENTURES.com/spotlight.